Hey everyone, my name is Ellen, and in today's 20-minute technique video, I wanted to address something that you guys have been asking about for years, which is how to palm mute. So stay tuned if this is something that you want to find out more about. Alright, so just a disclaimer, the advice that I have for this video is going to be tailored towards acoustic guitars. And a lot of it can be applied to electric as well, but it's going to be a little bit different. So everything I say in this video is going to be for those of you who play acoustic guitars. Alright, so first let's start off with what is palm muting. So palm muting is a technique you can do when playing the guitar that kind of dampens the sound of the strings a little bit. So let me go ahead and just show you a little bit of what that would sound like. So even though it's called palm muting, or I call it palm muting, you're not really muting the strings because you can still hear the tones and everything. It's more just like dampening the sound, and you're not even really using your palm either. You're more using the kind of meaty, like fleshy side by your pinky. That's gonna be the side of your hand that you're gonna use to accomplish palm muting. So let's go ahead and jump into how to find the perfect spot to palm mute. Alright, so basically what you want to do is you want to start with your hand close to the bridge of your guitar here. And this is going to allow for more ringing. That way you can kind of still hear the notes that you're playing. So this is a good way to start out when you're trying to figure out the spot to put your hand for palm muting. So use the side of your palm, so just right here, this little fleshy side here by your pinky. You're just going to lay it down across all 6 strings on your guitar. Pay attention to the pressure that you're putting on the strings. It should be kind of an even pressure across all 6 strings. So with an uneven pressure, you'll notice that some strings will be muted, but others won't. For instance, if I was just muting the top strings, the bottom would ring. So you can see I have an uneven pressure there, or the other way around too. If you have uneven pressure, maybe your bottom strings are muted, but your top strings are ringing. All right, so basically whenever you are palm muting, you want to make sure that all 6 strings are being covered by your hand with an even pressure. Alright, so now the next thing you want to do is choose a chord shape on your left hand that you're really comfortable with leaving in a position for a long time. That way it's just going to help you not, tire out and fatigue with your left hand trying to hold like a ridiculous chord. So for me, I'm just going to be holding down my E minor chord because that's the first chord I ever learned and I find it really easy to play. Alright, so now talking more about palm mutes. So in general, the closer you are to the bridge, or the closer your hand is to the bridge, the more the strings are going to ring. And then the closer you get to your fretboard, the more you're going to hear kind of a crunchy muted sound. All right, so what you want to do is find the sweet spot where your strings sound dampened but not completely dead. So you should be able to still hear each note. So typically on a guitar, it's going to be somewhere between the bridge and the sound hole, somewhere in this little section right here. So what you want to do is just take your hand, lay it across all 6 strings with even pressure, and just go ahead and start doing a down strum. And you want to slowly scoot your hand up towards the sound hole till you find a good spot where you like the way that it sounds. So you can hear the closer I get to the sound hole, the closer my hand gets to the sound hole, the more dead the strings are. You can't even hear that I'm playing different chords now, right? So you want to make sure that you're finding the sweet spot where you can still hear the notes. I think on most guitars, it'll probably be near the bridge. So definitely start down there. If it's ringing a little bit too much by the bridge, just scoot it up maybe a few centimeters at a time until you find a good spot. Alright, so once you find your sweet spot, so for me, mine's right about here. It's like really close to the bridge. I'm basically leaning my hand against the bridge. I'll get a second angle here for you guys so that you can see exactly where my hand is. But for me, my sweet spot on this particular guitar that I have is really close to the bridge, and that's where it has the kind of dampened sound, but you can still hear each note. Alright. So once you find your sweet spot, go ahead and just start strumming your chord 1 string at a time. You want to do this 1 at a time to make sure that you are correctly muting each string and not leaving any out, okay? So if you're doing this slowly and you hear a string is still ringing like this, just readjust your hand to make sure that it's completely flat, laying across all 6 strings. Alright guys, so I've zoomed in a little bit. Hopefully you can see a little more clearly now, but whenever you are playing guitar normally and you're ringing it, see how you're not touching the strings with your hand, but here, when you're palm muting, I'm resting my hand against all 6 strings here. So the difference between palm muting and not palm muting is literally just how close your hand is and how much pressure you're putting on those 6 strings. And now, like I said, you can also do palm mutes when picking, and it's going to be the exact same thing. Your sweet spot will still be in the same spot as it was with strumming, except now when you pick, it's going to be palm muted. All right, instead of ringing. And again, we're just accomplishing that by resting our hand really gently in our sweet spot across all 6 strings. All right, so now that you know how to find your sweet spot when you're palm muting and kind of the techniques of being able to palm mute, let's talk a little bit about how to practice palm muting. So I've said this in so many of my other tutorials, and I know it's not the most fun thing to do, but practice really is going to be your best friend here. Anything that has to do with guitar, really, it's going to be daily practice. It's going to be the #1 key to success. But with that being said, let me just go ahead and give you some tips and tricks on how to practice palm muting. So the first couple times you're trying this, you'll probably need to re-find the sweet spot. You can probably eyeball it a little bit and, kind of guesstimate where it was, but you're going to want to do the whole up and down thing until you find the sweet spot again. And the more you do this, every time you sit down to play your guitar, the more you practice this, the more you're going to go straight to that sweet spot, and you're just going to learn, muscle memory, where that sweet spot is on whichever guitar you're playing. And then my second tip, which is something that I say all the time, which I know you guys are not the biggest fans of, is to use a metronome. I know it's not fun at all, but it really is going to help you improve your skills. So basically what you want to do with a metronome is pick a speed that you are comfortable doing strums on. So I usually try to start people at around 70 to 75 beats per minute. And what you want to do is strum on each metronome click. All right, so I've got a metronome going at 70 beats per minute, and this is just one that I totally just looked up on Google. You could literally just look up any metronome or download any metronome app. But I have it going at 70 beats per minute. I usually find that that's a pretty good speed for people. And what you want to do is, after you find your sweet spot, go ahead and play 1 down strum on every click of the metronome. So I've got my E minor chord on. And when you're doing this, what you want to listen for is to make sure that all of your strings are being muted equally. I have to speak during the metronome for some reason. So basically when you're practicing, you want to start with down strums. When you're doing palm muting, it is a little bit on, the easier side. So definitely start out with just down strums until you get really used to that. And then after that, what you want to do is turn your metronome back on, and then you're going to practice doing up strums on every other click or in between every click, okay? So let me go ahead and show you that. I'm going to turn my metronome back on to 70 beats per minute. And so now I'm going to add an up strum as well. So we've got down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So something that I've noticed with people is when you do an up strum on a palm mute, it can be a little bit more tough than a down strum. So something that I used to do when I was first learning how to do this is I would take my pinky with my pick in it, like on my playing hand, and I would just rest it really lightly on the pick guard here. I wouldn't suggest you do this all the time, but if you just kind of need a little bit of help finding your sweet spot and making sure that you are giving an even pressure to all 6 strings, you can kind of just put your pinky down here, and what that's going to do is kind of push your hand against all 6 strings so that you can accomplish that down strum and up strum palm mute. Sometimes if you don't put your pinky there, you'll see that it accidentally rings a little bit when you don't want it to, because we're trying to practice our palm mute. So if you're a beginner and you find that easier, go ahead and just lay your pinky down, and that will kind of push your hand against the strings a little bit more. All right, that way you can practice your up strums as well. So after you've done that, and you can do your down strums and you can do your up strums with the palm mute, the next thing I want you to practice doing is putting the palm mute only on certain beats or only on certain measures. In a lot of song covers, especially on my tutorials, you'll see that I do this a lot. I'll go back and forth between letting the strings ring and applying a palm mute. So this is how you can practice that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my metronome back on and then show you guys how to do this. Again, we're on 70 beats per minute, and what I'm going to do is I'm only going to palm mute the second and fourth beats, okay? I'm gonna let the first and third beats ring. So we've got ring, palm, ring, palm. You can also do this for different measures. So if you wanted to try one measure without a palm mute and one measure with, it would sound something like this. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, palm mute, 2, 3, 4. Ringing, 2, 3, 4. Palming, 2, 3, 4. All of this is going to really help you get used to palm muting and get used to going back and forth between palm muting and not palm muting. All right, so now that you know what palm muting is and how to find your sweet spot and how to practice palm muting, let's talk a little bit about why you would want to know how to palm mute. Why is that even necessary? So as a guitar player, palm muting is one of the kind of more necessary skills. The more songs that you learn to play, the more you'll see and pick up on the fact that lots of songs use this technique when they're playing their songs. It really does add more of a rhythmic feel, and it allows you to just kind of emphasize the rhythm a little bit more in some songs. This is especially true when you pair a palm mute with, accenting different beats and things like that. You'll see the more songs you play and the more different strumming patterns you encounter, adding a palm mute can drastically change the way a song sounds from the way that it's ringing to the more, staccato, which is kind of like, pointed feel of it whenever you add a palm mute. So it is kind of necessary the further you get along in your guitar progress to kind of pick up on the skill. That way when you're playing your songs and doing your covers and things, you can kind of switch up the guitar part a little bit and make it sound a little bit more interesting without having to actually switch up, your strumming pattern and things like that. Something I didn't cover while we were actually going through the palm muting process and how to do it is that when you add a palm mute, it can actually allow you to play rhythms a little bit faster. So you'll see when you're letting your chords ring and stuff, you can see the wide motion of my strumming hand, right? So whenever you palm mute, it kind of forces your right playing hand to stay in one spot. So let's say you're learning a song with a super quick strumming pattern. If you're trying to do a bunch of down strums like that, it's going to take you just a few microseconds longer to get back down into the position that you need to be in, which is fine for a slow song or something like that. But if you're playing a really quick song, the smaller your motions are, the faster you'll be able to play. So palm muting is kind of forces you to do that because it forces you to keep your hand in the same spot so you can play faster, all right? So that's another thing that is good about palm muting is it allows you to play some of those rhythms that are a little bit quicker, but it also teaches you how to not make such big motions with your, playing hand, which can be really handy later on when you're learning tougher songs. So yeah, beyond that, palm muting is kind of more of just a preferential thing. If you like the way it sounds, experiment with playing songs and adding a palm mute. If you prefer the way it rings in certain songs, go ahead and do it that way. Really, it's up to you. However you want to portray your cover, however you want to do your cover is the best way to go. So experiment with palm muting every now and then. If you like the way it sounds in the song you're playing, add it. If you don't, then don't. But if you are following my tutorials and I say, hey, I would like to add a palm mute there, just remember, you can always ignore me. You don't have to do it the way that I'm doing it. That's just the way that I think sounds really great. So if you are someone who follows a lot of my tutorials, then this is how I would suggest practicing your palm mute, figuring out how to do a palm mute, and then taking those songs and practicing it within a song. All right, so just some closing kind of overlying tips I have for you guys on palm muting. Remember that every guitar player and every guitar is different. So if you have multiple guitars, maybe they're different sizes, maybe they're different materials, whatever, every guitar is going to be a little different. So whenever you sit down to play a new guitar, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time, just a few minutes, to find that sweet spot on that specific guitar. Something else to remember is that it's probably not going to sound great the first time you do it. Palm muting is one of those skills. It's like bar chords. You need to put in the practice time and you need to get used to it a little bit more before it starts to sound really good. So the first few times you're doing palm muting, it might sound a little bit scratchy. Make sure that you're in the sweet spot so that you can still hear the individual notes. They shouldn't all sound like scratchy. Right, so just make sure that that's not the problem, but if it doesn't sound beautiful the very first time you try it, that's totally normal. Just make sure to practice it a little bit each time you sit down to play your guitar. Another thing you can do is to listen to different kinds of songs and try to practice listening for a palm mute, listening for when you hear more of a punchy rhythm and things like that, and just find your songs that you like to listen to and figure out where you can add a palm mute in. It's going to make playing a lot more fun because it's going to make the guitar sound a lot more interesting. Another thing that I did want to share with you guys is something that I actually do a lot in my videos and when I play my songs is I will add a palm mute whenever I do down strums only. But then when I go up, I kind of lift my hand off of the strings to intentionally let it ring. And when you put in a cool strumming pattern with that, it kind of gives this cool feel of a little bit rhythmic, but a little bit ringy, and I really love the way that this sounds. So basically, I like to palm mute my down strums and let my up strums ring. And it also helps to kind of just like, you know, showcase whatever chord you're playing. So that's more of an advanced skill, so you definitely want to practice slowly and start slowly when you're palm muting with just the down strums, then add in the up strums, then figure out, you know, different beats to do it on and stuff. But eventually what that practice is going to do is going to allow you to figure out where you want to palm mute and where you don't want to palm mute, and then that way when you do different strumming patterns, you can make all sorts of things sound really cool and really different and really unique just by, you know, adding a palm mute or taking it out. Okay, so really quick guys, I wanted to show you this as well. So again, this is more of an advanced thing, but when I do a lot of my tutorials, you'll see that I palm mute the down strums and then let the up strums ring. And you know, the quicker you get at this, the less apparent it's gonna be when you're going from a palm mute to not palm muting. So here's an example. And I'm going to do that a little slower so you can see where I am palm muting and where I'm not. So at my first two beats, I'm doing a palm mute, and then on my third, I kind of let it ring. So, and then when you go back up, I don't know if you can see that in the camera here, but every time I'm doing an up strum, I'm kind of lifting my palm up in time to put it back down for my down strum. And that's how I get that kind of chuggy kind of sound, okay? So whenever you're doing down, I just strum down and leave my hand there, and then when you're up, you just want to lift your hand up, but not that big of a motion. It should be barely noticeable, and again, this is one of those more advanced palm muting techniques, so obviously you want to start out slower, but eventually this should be your goal, is to be able to get more of a chuggy sound that's barely even noticeable between palm muting and not palm muting. And the last piece of advice I have for you can apply to literally anything that you're trying to learn with guitar, but keep your head up. This is a skill that needs to be learned and it needs to be practiced, and of course that is going to take some time. So don't go in expecting that you're just magically going to get palm muting all of a sudden. You will probably have to put in a few days, a few hours, a few weeks, depending on how often you play your guitar, of practice time. So don't get discouraged if it doesn't sound great the very first few times that you try it. Just keep on, you know, plugging through. Make sure you find that sweet spot. If you have to, return to this video and do these practice sessions with me. But eventually, you know, once you practice it over and over again for a few days, a few weeks, you'll start to hear yourself get better. You'll start to hear the tones be a little bit more apparent when you're palm muting and things like that. And then you're really gonna just start having fun with it. And I think that is the key, is when you start to have fun and you start to find out places you can put it in your favorite songs, that's when it really all comes together. So just keep your head up. It's gonna take a little bit of practice. It's probably not gonna sound that great at the beginning, but you gotta just kind of push through that kind of stuff, okay? So I think that does conclude all of the tips and tricks I have for you about palm muting. If you have any other questions that I didn't address, make sure to leave those in a comment below and I will try my best to get back to you guys. But yeah, this is kind of like palm muting 101. I really hope that it helped you, and I hope that you'll be able to use it in more of my videos now. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.